My husband had been dead for less than 3 days when my son slapped me across the face in front of his casket. If someone asked me what hurts more than losing your partner of nearly 50 years, I would say this: being slapped by your only son, then told to leave your home, all in the same breath. My name is Eileene Carter. I'm 68 years old, a widow, a mother who believed that love and sacrifice would always be repaid with kindness. A woman who once thought that if she gave enough, her family would never let her feel alone. I was wrong, and that slap was the moment I finally saw it. Thomas died on a Tuesday morning. It was unusually cold for spring. He passed peacefully, holding my hand until the very end. His fingers loosened like a quiet goodbye. I held on longer, hoping my grip could bring him back. The funeral was held in our backyard, at the house we built together with sweat and savings. We'd spent years turning a broken little cottage into a warm home. Every beam, every stair, every coat of paint, we made it ours. And yet today, I felt like a stranger here. Not because Thomas was gone, but because I was being erased. I sat near the window, clutching my mourning scarf. People came in and greeted Andrew, my son, as the man of the house now. No one asked if I'd eaten. No one poured me a cup of tea. I quietly got up to help serve guests, out of habit more than anything. But Natalie, my daughter-in-law, gently took the tray from my hands. "You should sit, Mom. Let me handle this." Her voice was soft, but her eyes said, "You're in the way." So I returned to my seat, silently. Among the voices, the hymns, and the rustling of suits, I felt myself sinking. Like a stone at the bottom of a well no one would rescue. I remembered the night Andrew had a fever at age 10. I stayed up beside him, cooling his forehead every hour. I remembered turning down a nursing job because I didn't want to be away from him too long. I remembered skipping meals so he could have new shoes for school. I remembered telling myself, "It's okay, I'm the mom, that's what we do." But today I wasn't the mom anymore. I was invisible. After the ceremony, most guests had left. I was gathering wilted flowers when Andrew approached, my son, the boy who once begged to sleep in my bed during thunderstorms. "Mom," he started. I looked up, expecting a hug. Instead, he said, "I think it's time you moved out." I froze. "What?" "You know the house is under my name now, and Natalie doesn't feel comfortable with you here." "Your father never said that." "We'll handle the paperwork. You don't need to worry about it." Before I could reply, Natalie appeared beside him. "There are still guests outside," she said, then turned to me with a polished smile. "Mom, maybe you could start packing." I opened my mouth to speak, to protest, but then slap, it came out of nowhere. My cheek burned. I don't know whose hand it was, Natalie's, Andrew's, maybe both. All I know is no one looked surprised, no one apologized. "Just go," Andrew said calmly. "This isn't your home anymore." I turned toward the casket. Thomas's face in the photo was kind as always, but his eyes, they looked like they were weeping for me now. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I turned and walked upstairs, packed in silence, a small suitcase, a couple of sweaters, a photo frame from 1997, and a folder of documents. Thomas had given it to me a few weeks before he passed. "Keep it safe," he'd said. "You'll need it." I came down the stairs alone. No one asked where I was going. No one followed. I opened the door. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the scent of dying lilies and forgotten love. I stepped outside. No destination, no plan. But for the first time in 40 years, I was no longer walking as a shadow. I stayed at Marion's house, an old friend I used to work with at the public library. She offered me her upstairs attic room. It was small, a little damp. The wooden stairs creaked under every step. I didn't choose this place for comfort. I chose it because I had nowhere else to go. The first night away from home, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my side, staring out the window. Streetlights cast shadows across the walls, distorted shapes that looked like broken memories. The ceiling above had a long crack across it, like a wound someone tried to patch, but never fully healed. Outside, the wind rattled the branches. Each gust whistled through the cracked window pane, sounding like a sigh from a forgotten mother. I missed my old bed, Thomas's pillow. The morning cup of tea I brewed at 5 a.m. out of habit. The soft creak of the floorboards whenever he crossed the room, always trying not to wake me. Now it was just silence. I turned on the nightstand lamp. The room still felt foreign. I felt like a guest in someone else's life. Or worse, like I had died and no one noticed. I shut my eyes, but the thoughts kept flooding in. Did I do something wrong? Did I raise Andrew the wrong way? Was I too soft, too forgiving, too hopeful? Had I been blind all these years? I remembered one time back in high school when Andrew skipped classes for a whole week to play video games. Thomas was furious, wanted to ground him for a month. But I stepped in. He's just a boy, he'll grow out of it, I had said. I thought love alone would guide him. But maybe. I made excuses when I should have taught him better. Maybe I raised a son who doesn't know how to respect or appreciate. I used to believe that motherly love was unbreakable. But that slap and the words, "This isn't your home anymore," ripped that bond into shreds. No phone call, no text, no apology. After I walked out the door, I had become nothing more than a helper whose contract had expired. The next morning, I made myself a cup of tea. Marion had left for work. The kitchen was tiled in old white ceramic, worn and chipped in the corners. There were 4 chairs around the table, but I sat alone, staring across from no one. My small leather bag sat beside me. Inside was something I hadn't dared to open since I left the house. The folder Thomas gave me before he died. I pulled it out. Inside were copies of his will, bank documents, and one sealed envelope. On the front, in his careful handwriting, it read, "For Eileene, when you need to remember you're not weak." My hands trembled, not from fear, but because I knew opening that letter meant facing a truth I wasn't ready for. Thomas had seen this coming. My quiet, steady husband had understood our son better than I ever had. I opened the envelope, just a single page, his handwriting familiar and steady. "If you're reading this, it means you've been hurt, and you think you're alone, but you're not. You have yourself, your dignity, your voice, your right to stand tall, no matter who tries to silence it. Andrew is our son, but he does not have the right to treat you like a stranger." I folded the letter back gently. His words dropped like water into the deepest crack in my heart. I didn't cry, but my hands curled into fists. I stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know what a woman of 68, with no home and no clear plan, could possibly do next. But I knew one thing. I would not sit here and wait for someone else to decide if I deserved to exist. I spent the entire morning sitting alone after reading Thomas's letter. The small kitchen in Marion's house was silent. No footsteps, no humming kettle. Just a faint stream of light filtering through the dusty glass window, landing gently on the folder I'd placed on the table. I hadn't opened it any further. I just sat there, holding a lukewarm cup of tea, head resting against the chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. And perhaps for the first time in years, I was forced to look back at my life, not as a mother, not as a wife, just as a person, me. I used to have dreams. That might sound silly coming from a 68-year-old woman, but I truly had my own world once, small, vibrant, full of stories, before it was folded away beneath laundry baskets and grocery lists. I once dreamed of becoming a writer. I loved writing since I was 13. One of my short stories was even published in the school paper. Thomas fell in love with me through the letters I wrote when he was in the military, long, heartfelt, vivid. He used to joke, "Reading your letters feels like watching a movie. Every word paints a picture." We married when I was 22. Andrew came soon after. I planned to take just 1 year off college. But then the baby came, money got tight. Thomas changed jobs, his mother fell ill, and Andrew started school. And just like that, I never went back. I didn't resent it. Truly, I didn't. I considered myself lucky to be a wife and mother. I told myself that living for others was the noblest thing a woman could do. But looking back now, I realize no one ever asked if I was happy, not once. I remember my 40th birthday so vividly. I cooked an entire meal, baked a cake from scratch. I hoped Thomas and Andrew would remember. Thomas came home late, exhausted, went straight to bed. Andrew asked for money to buy a video game. I ate my birthday dinner alone. 2 tiny candles flickering on top of the cake. I even sang happy birthday to myself in my head. Then I cleared the table, washed the dishes, turned off the lights. I slowly went through the folder, bank statements, a copy of Thomas's will, his scribbled notes. Then something slipped out, a small faded piece of paper. My handwriting. I recognized it instantly. It was a to-do list I'd written 30 years ago. Take Andrew to dentist, pay electric bill, submit time-off request, Natalie's due soon. Buy cupcakes for Andrew's class, send thank you note to PTA. I stared at that little scrap of paper, my chest tightened. Every single day I lived for someone else. I existed to serve, to step back, to not bother anyone. I never once stopped to ask, what do I need? And now that I'm no longer cooking meals, folding clothes, managing calendars, I've become disposable. Andrew didn't become ungrateful overnight. The truth is, part of the fault is mine. I taught him that mothers are always available, always giving, always silent. I never showed him that mothers have dreams too, that we have limits, that we bleed. I stayed quiet for so long. He mistook it for consent. I put the papers back in the folder. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. I've cried enough for a lifetime. Tears don't fix what silence has broken. What I felt was this: if I don't change, the rest of my life will be nothing but repetition, quiet, invisible, and numb. I don't have time to wait for apologies. I don't need Andrew to understand. I just need one thing: to remember who I am. And I know now. I'm a woman who gave up everything for her family. But today, I must learn to stand up for myself. I lifted my head, looked out the window. The sky was still gray, but a thin beam of sunlight had slipped through the clouds, dancing across the sidewalk. Not enough to warm the room, but just enough to remind me there is still light in me. It took me almost 3 days after reading Thomas's letter to finally open my phone and search for the attorney's number. Not because I didn't know what needed to be done, but because, deep inside me, there was still that quiet, stubborn hesitation, like a child who's been thrown out, still glancing back at the window, hoping someone will call her home. I knew what I was about to do would shock Andrew, maybe even make him hate me, and I, despite the slap, despite being thrown out, still couldn't stop myself from remembering the way I once rocked him to sleep, kissed the scrapes on his little elbows. I'm a mother, and being a mother means it's not easy to cut ties. But I'm also a person, and I finally understood I couldn't let anyone treat me this way ever again. That night, I sat at Marion's dining table, phone in hand, staring at the screen. The name Megan Dale, attorney, glowed back at me. Thomas had saved it, had told me to call her if ever the time came. I didn't press call right away. I just sat there, staring at her name, heart knotted. If I called her, it would mean I was ready to stand against my own son. It would mean taking legal steps, possibly dragging Andrew into court. And I knew people would talk, relatives might call me cold, ungrateful, bringing family business to outsiders. But have any of them asked how I was treated? Not one person called after the funeral. No one asked where I went. No one said what Andrew did was wrong. They erased me like I never existed. Thomas left me these documents, his will, the mortgage, bank records, not so I could fight our son, but so I wouldn't be erased in silence and injustice. I placed my fingers on the screen. My heart pounded. A part of me still wanted to back down, but then I remembered that morning in kindergarten when Andrew was bullied, and I knelt in front of him and said, "Don't let anyone push you out of the place you belong." Now it was my turn. I couldn't let anyone push me out of my own life. I pressed call. The woman on the other end spoke in a calm, professional tone. "Law Office of Megan Dale. How can I help you today?" I took a deep breath. "My name is Eileene Carter. My husband, Thomas Carter, may have been a former client of yours. I have some documents he left behind, and I believe I need legal advice." A pause, then her voice softened. "Yes, I remember Mr. Carter. He came to us a few months ago. He was very thorough in preparing for you." My throat tightened. Megan scheduled me for a meeting on Monday afternoon. I ended the call, put the phone down, and for the first time in weeks, I felt calm, not happy, not sad, just steady. The next day, I stepped into a modest law office on Maple Street. It was quiet, warm lighting, a neat desk. Megan, mid-40s, sharp yet gentle, greeted me with a firm handshake. "I've reviewed the documents you sent," she said. "The will is valid. Mr. Thomas clearly outlined your rightful share." She handed me a printout. The house, the very house I'd been thrown out of, was legally 75% mine through an old joint mortgage, and Andrew, through his coercive behavior, risked disinheritance if I chose to contest. "The decision is entirely yours," Megan said. "Whatever path you choose, I'll stand with you." I looked at the paper, at the name, Eileene Carter, 75% ownership. I didn't cry, I didn't flinch, I nodded. For the first time in years, I felt like I had weight, like my name mattered, like I wasn't just someone who waited for permission to exist. I am Eileene Carter, and I just reclaimed the right to say no. I received the first call from Andrew 3 days after Megan submitted the legal notice to court. I was folding clothes in Marion's guest room when the phone started buzzing. The name on the screen, Andrew's son. The screen glowed under the pale afternoon light, filtering through the window. I froze. I didn't pick up. I had once longed to see that name again. During those first sleepless nights in this unfamiliar bed, during quiet mornings when I made tea alone, I used to dream of a message, just something simple. "Where are you, Mom?" Or even just, "Mom." But now, when he finally called, I felt nothing warm, only cold. Because I knew he wasn't calling out of love, he was calling out of fear. I let the first call go unanswered, then the second, the third. By the fourth, I put it on speaker so Marion could hear too. Andrew's voice came through, rushed, strained. "Mom, what are you doing? Are you really suing me?" I said nothing. I listened, but let silence speak for me. "This house, it's mine. Dad left it to me. You're trying to kick me, Natalie, and the kids out?" His tone rose, full of indignation, but not remorse. Still, I stayed quiet. "Mom, that day at the funeral, it was just a misunderstanding." Natalie lost her temper. "I didn't mean for things to go that far. I've just been stressed, okay?" I listened, unmoved, not because the words were harsh, but because they came too late, and they were too predictable. Then his voice shifted, soft, almost childlike. "Please, Mom, I'm sorry. Come back. We'll fix everything. I'll listen to whatever you say. Just don't take it this far." I placed the phone on the table and looked at Marion. She said nothing, but her eyes said enough. I stood, quietly poured myself a glass of water, every motion steady, like I was clearing a dinner table, not making a decision that would define the rest of my life. That evening, I messaged Megan. "Andrew called. I won't respond. Please proceed as planned." She replied almost immediately, "Understood. The property is frozen. The petition for asset coercion is underway. All legal documents from the will and mortgage are solid." I stared at my phone. My eyes didn't tear up. I just felt peaceful, not because I had won, but because I was no longer afraid. The next day, Megan informed me Andrew had hired his own attorney. They submitted an official response, open to amicable resolution. I smiled, not triumphantly, not bitterly, just a small smile, more tired than satisfied. He feared losing the house, not losing me. He feared losing assets, not losing the woman he once called Mom. There was no apology, just phrases like, "It was all a misunderstanding." Family matters shouldn't go this far. Mothers shouldn't demand things from their children. I laughed softly. I've spent my whole life giving. Now I only want to live as someone who has a right to speak. That's not a demand. It's the reclaiming of dignity. That night, I sat at the mirror, the woman looking back at me. She wasn't the same one who stood frozen in her own son's house weeks ago. The silver hair was still there, the lines around the eyes, but in her gaze, something had changed. She wasn't afraid of speaking anymore. If Thomas were here, he'd be sitting beside me now, his hand resting gently on mine. I could almost hear him whisper, "I knew you'd do it." I wasn't out for revenge. I wasn't bitter. I was simply taking back my right to exist fully. I looked out Marion's window. The city had lit up, light spilling from windows everywhere, each glow a life of its own. I didn't know where my future would take me, but I knew one thing with certainty. I will never again ask for permission just to exist. The final call between me and Andrew happened on a quiet, windless Saturday afternoon. Unlike before, this time I was the one who dialed. Not because I was softening, not because I wanted to mend things, but because I needed to end it, my way, with my voice. I sat on Marion's balcony, a cup of tea in my hand, still warm. The orange glow of the sun poured over the trees. I had thought long and hard. I didn't want to vanish quietly, like I never existed. I wanted my son, even if it was for the last time, to hear his mother speak without trembling, without shame, with clarity and dignity. "Hello?" Andrew picked up almost instantly, his voice hopeful, relieved. I didn't stall. "It's me. I'm calling today to make everything clear." A pause, then his voice again, lighter. "Thanks for calling." I really wanted to talk too. This has gotten out of hand. I smiled, not with joy, but calm detachment. Yes, it has, but not because I hired a lawyer. It got out of hand the moment you slapped me at your father's funeral. The moment you threw me out of the house your father and I bought together. The moment you looked at me as if I were just a worn-out maid. His voice dropped. "Mom, I was just angry. Everyone was on edge. I didn't think you'd take it so personally." I let out a quiet laugh, not bitter, just resigned. "I didn't take it personally, Andrew. I let it build up." Silence. I let it sit for a moment, then continued. "You asked me what I want. Let me be clear. I don't want the house. I don't want your money. I don't want your pity. I want one thing only, the right to be a person. The right to speak up when I'm treated unfairly. The right to say no when I'm being used or ignored." "But you're my mom. We're family. Why are you suing me?" Andrew nearly shouted. I looked out at the sky, soft and faded above me. "Because I'm your mother. I kept quiet for 40 years, but I'm also a human being, and no human being deserves to be treated like they don't matter just because they love too much." My voice didn't shake. It wasn't angry. It was simply true. "I'm not calling to make you feel bad. I'm calling to let you know. From now on, I will live for myself. No more waiting, no more depending, no more pretending." Andrew went quiet again, then asked, confused, "So you're just going to live alone for the rest of your life?" I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. My tea had cooled. Maybe I used to be afraid of being alone, but now I know it's better to be alone in freedom than surrounded by people who don't respect me. Loneliness won't destroy me, but silent humiliation almost did. He didn't respond. I heard a sigh. Then he hung up. No goodbye, no apology. Just a long, empty silence, much like our relationship, hollow, lost, and no longer worth clinging to. I set the phone down. I didn't cry. I felt light, as if I had taken off a heavy coat I had worn far too long. Marion stepped out onto the balcony and saw me sitting still. "You all right?" she asked gently. I nodded. More than all right. And I meant it. That evening, I opened my journal and wrote. I was once a wife, a mother, a shadow. But starting today, I'm just me, and that's enough. Outside, the streetlights flickered on without a sound. A chapter closed, not with noise or drama. Just a woman who stood up, wiped her own tears, and chose to keep walking, alone but upright. I moved out of Marion's house exactly 6 weeks after arriving. Not because she ever hinted I had to, but because I was finally ready. Ready to live a life no longer clinging to anyone else. Ready to try, even if late, even if slow, for me. I found a small apartment on the western edge of the city. I didn't pick it because it was cheap. I picked it because the morning sun spilled through the windows. There was space for mint to grow in the backyard, and enough quiet that I no longer felt like an extra in someone else's story. When I moved in, I brought only 3 suitcases, a few clothes, a stack of old books, and a photo of Thomas proposing to me. I brought nothing from the old house, because I knew that place hadn't been home to me for a long, long time. The first few days living alone felt strange. I was used to full houses, the sound of footsteps, pans clanking, babies crying. Now there were only sparrows outside my balcony and the gentle hum of the kettle as I made tea. But I didn't feel lonely. I felt spacious like someone finally stepping out of a dress 2 sizes too small. I started writing again, not to blame anyone, but to remember myself. I wrote about giving up my dreams to become a daughter-in-law. About the night I cried after my son told me, "Mom, please don't meddle in our marriage." About the time I almost signed the house over, thinking, well, as long as it makes them happy. I wrote, not to accuse, but to acknowledge. I had once loved too much, endured too long, and stayed too silent. Now I was learning how to speak. One morning I walked past a tiny bookstore on the corner of my street. A handwritten sign on the door, "Hiring part-time, must love books." I walked in and asked, without much hope, but the owner, Louisa, a woman in her 60s, short gray hair, sharp glasses, looked at me and said, "You look like someone who used to work in a library." I nodded. She smiled. "Well then, what are we waiting for?" I started working 3 days a week. Nothing intense, no pressure, no one bossing me around. I arranged shelves, watered the plants, and sometimes made tea for people who stayed to read poems from decades ago. And each time someone asked, "Do you live alone?" I'd smile and nod, "Yes, but I live fully." Marion still visits from time to time. We sit under my bougainvillea vines. She tells me stories about marching for women's rights in the 80s. I tell her how I've become emotionally attached to a succulent I bought last week. We don't mention Andrew, not out of bitterness, but because some chapters are best left closed, not reopened, not torn out, just closed respectfully. Once I dreamt of Thomas. He didn't say anything, just sat across from me, smiled like the morning fog. I woke up, opened the window, and took a long breath. I'm okay now, and I've forgiven them all, but I'm not going back. People often ask me, isn't it scary being an older woman living alone? I answer, of course it's scary, but what scared me more was living a life where I had no voice. Being alone isn't loneliness. Real loneliness is sitting at a family table where no one sees you anymore. I didn't become someone famous, didn't chase a big, bold dream. I simply began with the smallest thing, loving myself. I made tea for one, cleaned the house for my own feet to walk freely, hung a picture not for others to admire, but so I could remember I was once Eileene, and I still am. Today it rained gently. I sat inside the bookstore writing these words. No one rushed me. No one gave me orders. No one waited for anything from me. And for the first time in 40 years, I'm not waiting for anything either. I'm just living, lightly, freely, fully. I'm writing these final words on a quiet Sunday afternoon, in the little bookstore where I now work. Outside, the rain just stopped. Soft sunlight reflects off the wet roofs. A small child walks by, holding a copy of Charlotte's Web, the same book I used to read to Andrew when he was 6. I watched the child pass and smiled, not with sadness, not with regret, just like watching an old memory drift by, light as a cloud. I spent most of my life serving others. I used to believe love meant sacrifice, meant silence, meant swallowing pain to keep peace. I forgot my own voice, stood inside my own home and felt like a stranger. Believed that if I disappeared, no one would even notice. And then one day, I left, not to make anyone miss me, but to finally look in the mirror and whisper, I'm still here. I'm not someone special, not rich, not famous, not followed by thousands. I'm just a woman who had been forgotten and learned how to remember herself. I don't share this story to ask for sympathy. I share it for the women reading this, who may be sitting in a noisy house but feel completely hollow inside. For those who've heard, Mom, stop interfering. It's not your place anymore. Just rest, you're old now. This is our house now, you're just staying here. I write for every woman who's ever been called a burden. And I want to say something to you, not as a slogan, not as a speech, but as a truth I've lived. You still have worth. Even if no one needs you anymore, even if they've forgotten what you sacrificed, even if you're older, slower, no longer the center of their world, you still have the right to choose, to speak, to begin again. It is never too late to say, I deserve better. It is never too late to return to yourself. If I could do it after 60, after losing my husband, after being betrayed by the very son I gave birth to, then so can you. You don't have to walk away from everything like I did. Maybe you just need one small act. Say no once. Refuse something that makes you uncomfortable. Write one page in a journal, not for anyone to read, just for you to hear yourself again. Start there. Now I live in a small apartment. Every morning I brew tea, water my plants, read or write a little. Not many people call me mom anymore, but I speak to myself now with kindness. I don't live for anyone else. I live for the woman inside me, the one who waited years for a thank you that never came. I don't need that thank you anymore. I just need to live honestly. This isn't some fairy tale ending. My son may never come back. Natalie may always see me as a problem. I don't wait for them to change, because the one who needed to change was me. And I did. If you've read this far, thank you, not for supporting me, but for allowing yourself to hear a story this world so often silences, a story without grand victories or flashing lights. But one truth remains. A woman rose from the ashes, not to become a hero, but simply to be herself again. You can do that too. You don't need anyone's approval as long as you approve of yourself. I believe in you, because I used to be you. With all my heart, Eileene.